Back in the 80s, there was only one real way to cap off a successful young adult film: an animated series. This was exactly the case with the 1985 coming-of-age flick Teen Wolf, directed by Rod Daniel and Jeff Loeb. When the creators of the fun 80s romp realized they had a bona fide hit on their hands, it was only natural that they were interested in creating an animated show around it. The result was the 1986 TV show, The Cartoon Adventures of Teen Wolf, which ran for around 2 seasons on CBS. Yeah, but the 80s were literally a lifetime ago, and we'd be genuinely surprised if any of our younger viewers still know about this gem. Thus, in this marvelous video, we'll encounter another blast from the past as we dive into the details of the Teen Wolf cartoon. But before we move ahead, like this video and subscribe to our channel. It might be just a small click for you, but to us, it means an awful lot. With that done, prepare to bare your fangs and grow a bunch of facial hair, because it's going to get a little wild in here. Embarking on an animated adventure. So, it would be a bit unfair to go straight to the cartoon without even mentioning the 1985 film, as that is where it all actually started. Released in August of 1985, Teen Wolf is the quintessential 80s flick, starring probably the most 80s actor to ever appear on screen, Michael J. Fox. The film follows Scott Howard, a 17-year-old high school student who's obviously a werewolf. What follows is a comical high school adventure that sees Scott balance his high school life with his more wolf-like tendencies. Scott's transformation to a werewolf is the result of a family secret that's been handed down in the Howard family, generation after generation. Of course, Scott's transformations are also a clear metaphor for how puberty changes a teenager, but they're drawn to the most hilarious extremes. Needless to say, the film isn't an auteur-driven masterpiece that could change your life, but it's still quite entertaining, even in 2024. The film, produced and distributed by the Atlantic Releasing Corporation, grossed a whopping $30 million on a $4 million budget, and talks of an animated spin-off quickly became a reality. The show began production under Southern Star Hanna-Barbera Australia, better known today as Endemol Australia. Also attached to the project were Clubhouse Pictures and Atlantic Kushner Locke, who worked on the first and second seasons of the show, respectively. Most of the executives attached to the project were industry veterans like Jonathan Dana and Buzz Potomkin, who served as the executive producers, while Gordon Kent became the lone producer of the spin-off. Many of the designs are direct references from the original film, the most obvious being the main character, Scott Howard. To emphasize that this was the same character who appeared in the beloved film, they gave Scott's cartoon the same costume, including the famous high school jacket that Michael J. Fox wore. Despite the team's desire to maintain uniformity between the film and the show, they had to make do with an entirely new cast of voice actors, which actually worked out in the show's favor. The show retains many of the original elements, but it does manage to raise some new questions regarding Scott's powers. When Scott transforms into a wolf in the middle of a basketball match, it ends up making him kind of popular and notorious. However, in the cartoon, Scott is desperately trying to hold back his transformations, as they could betray his family's age-old secret. This, of course, adds higher stakes to each transformation, and even a layer of complexity to Scott's character, which is one of the central concerns of the cartoon. The animation, though simplistic, still holds up due to its faithful designs and vibrant palettes. And of course, there are those bangers by Miles Goodman that serve as the intros and outros for each other. Trust us, these synth-heavy melodies are nothing less than time machines to the 80s, bound to remain stuck in your head for weeks afterward. The entirety of the show is made up of 21 episodes, 13 in the first and 8 in the second season. Interestingly, the Cartoon Adventures of Teen Wolf actually ran for 3 seasons instead of 2, with the third entirely made up of reruns. The show also found a DVD release in 2017, making it clear that despite more than 30 years since its initial release, the cartoon is still dear to many fans who grew up with it. So now that we're caught up with how the Teen Wolf cartoon came to be, it's time to take a look at the different stories contained within its episodes, as that's what makes this show so special to so many viewers.
What's going on here?
A deep dive into the Teen Wolf 1986 animated show. Much like the film, the show revolves around Scott and the rest of the Howard family, as they deal with the pressures of being werewolves. Yeah, it's a strange sentence, but turning into a hairy lupine does come with its fair share of troubles, especially if you're a teenager in high school. The added pressure of trying to keep his family's real identity secret begins to play an integral part in most of the show's episodes. Scott's struggle to fit into high school wasn't such a big part of the movies, but the TV show weaves it into almost every arc. Well, this makes the werewolves quite relatable, to be honest. I mean, keeping up with appearances in high school is probably something that most audience can identify with on a very personal level. Another small change the cartoon made to the movie was changing the name of the fictional town the Howards live in, from Beacon Town to Wolverton. Also, it seems that the cartoon takes place a little while after the film, as Scott's little sister was not part of the film but became an important character in the animated version. Now, it's completely understandable that most cartoons in the 80s mostly shied away from more real-world issues. After all, it was a very turbulent time. But Teen Wolf wasn't one of those cartoons. The creators made sure that, despite this being a kids' show, the Teen Wolf series never shied away from themes that the average viewer might deem mature. Over the course of its 21 episodes, the show offers some very powerful critiques of the state of civil rights and the problems faced by the disabled community. Even Scott's transformations are clear metaphors for seizures or asthma attacks, afflictions that were barely spoken of in the 80s media. It's also evident that the attitudes of the townspeople, especially the annoying ones like Mayor Marconi, are essentially an allegory of racism. For much of the series, Scott is represented as the outsider among his more normal and less wolfish peers, which definitely adds an emotional depth to the entire story. Another alteration in the cartoon show is made to the character of Pamela, who's now a typical cheerleader, whereas in the movie she didn't really have much of a school spirit. The themes that we mentioned are embedded in every episode, often forming an integral part of the episode's story. Take for instance the very first episode, where Scott's family album gets mixed up in the back of his rival Mick's car. Mick is an athletic jock who attends Wolverton High and is responsible for much of the ostracization that Scott suffers at his high school. So obviously, having his entire family's Werewolf album lost in his bully's car is pretty bad news for Scott. To get the album back and protect his family's secret, Scott enlists his best buddy, Styles, to get him the album back. Scott's desire to fit in is center stage in this episode, with his anxiety regarding his family's true identity providing the basis for much of the conflict that follows. This pattern becomes a mainstay on the show, and can be seen even in the very next episode, titled The Werewolf Buster. Here we find Scott's family under direct threat from a werewolf hunter who has recently moved into town. To ensure the safety of his grandfather, who's hunting turkey in the forest of Wolverton, Scott's family is forced to come together. In a race against time, the family must alert the grandfather of the hunter's presence, before the hunter hunts the poor old guy, Wolf, down. The family secret again becomes a collective burden for the Scott family to bear, granting some very poignant moments in the middle of the comedic hijinks. This issue is again brought to the forefront in the episode The Beast Within, where the family finds themselves unable to control their workouts. Of course, this leads to many awkward situations, but more importantly, it threatens the family's peaceful existence in Wolverton. The episode is also interesting for depicting the uncertainty that the Howards feel regarding their own identities. After a certain point, the family even begins to receive confusing reports of a town monster as a consequence of their uncontrolled transformations. But this does not mean that the show is just concerned with more mature topics. We often find it leaning into more mundane areas, like Scott's quest to buy an electric guitar, his forays into the punk scene, and his romantic struggles with Pam. Over the various episodes, we also learned of more supernatural entities existing in the quaint town of Wolverton, like in the episode Under My Spell, where a mysterious family uses their magical powers to turn the townsfolk into zombies. One episode that we would especially like to recommend is Teen Wolf Come Home. Despite containing all the usual puns and jokes, this episode is still an extremely emotional one, as Scott loses all the memories of his family after a small accident. Over the course of the next 24 minutes, the writers use this premise as an opportunity to explore the strong bonds between the Howard family. In our humble opinion, this episode clearly demonstrates why the audience took a liking to these characters. After all, a werewolf family is a family nonetheless. Though the show did considerably well for a cartoon directed at kids, CBS soon found itself leaning towards the show with higher ratings. By 1987, the producers were struggling to get another season funded. All plans for a new season were eventually scrapped, but the show managed to survive on network TV for another year, albeit entirely through reruns. The show was taken off the air in November 7, 1987, but that doesn't mean that we overlook the episode that ended this brief but captivating saga. The penultimate episode, titled Scott and the Howlers, returns to its coming-of-age roots and sees Scott perform in a televised talent show. However, things kind of heat up when Scott realizes that the label wants to just sign him without the rest of his band. The teenager faces an unprecedented dilemma. The episode provides a very sensitive look at the entertainment industry, and also questions our protagonist's loyalty to his friends. The last episode of the show to ever air was titled Howlin' Cousins, and as you can probably guess, it's about a cousin that howls. Scott's distant relative Todd comes over to visit, but the two teenagers soon realize that they don't really have that much in common. Since Todd is a character who appeared in the live-action movie, where he was portrayed by Jason Bateman, fans have often questioned whether he would have a larger role in the story if a third season had been produced, but as we already know, that would never come to pass, as the show ended abruptly. All these intricate stories and great ideas might have meant nothing had it not been for the vibrant and believable characters that made Wolverton come alive. In our next section, let's take a brief look at the characters that helped us all wolf out in one way or another. Main characters from the show. Scott Howard. The main protagonist of the show, Scott, is a lovable rascal with all the problems of a typical high schooler. Add this to the fact that he's a werewolf, and you have a recipe for disaster. But what really endears Scott to the audience is the way in which he balances his two lives. He's also the kind of guy who could appear to be reckless and idiotic in one episode, only to be reduced to a confused and vulnerable teenager in the next. Scott spends a lot of his time on the show wondering about the social status of his family, and fearing the discovery of his family's secret. The show turns him from the popular guy depicted in the live action to more of an everyman, which makes the character all the more relatable. The character is voiced by the extremely talented Townsend Coleman, who makes every line believable and every joke hilarious with his performance. Harold Howard. Scott's widowed father is the only character on the animated show who was also voiced by the same actor who portrayed him in the live-action film, James Hampton. Harold is genuinely one of the coolest fictional dads we've seen on TV, owing to his characteristically laid-back attitude towards life. As a hardware store owner, he's usually above the social anxieties plaguing his son, but always comes to Scott's side when the teenager needs him the most. Also, Howard seems to be the most stable werewolf on the show, and rarely transforms throughout the 21 episodes. Lupe Howard. Lupe, Scott's younger sister, is an original character that was created just for the show. As she's fairly young, she has yet to exhibit the qualities of a natural werewolf. Throughout the show, Lupe desperately wants to become a werewolf, like the rest of her family, and at one point, even turns into one temporarily due to a magical spell. Since the show ended before we could find any concrete answers, it's still unclear whether she's the true wolf or not. Lupe is voiced by Jeannie Ellis. Grandpa Howard. Scott's grandfather is hands down one of the most hilarious characters on the show. Mostly unable to resist his wolf-like tendencies, Grandpa can often be found chasing cats and getting into all sorts of trouble. He also never goes back to his human form like Scott, causing even more unrest in the family. Also, it's his uncontrolled antics that always end up putting the Howards at risk of discovery, even though none of these instances are intentional on Grandpa's part. An immigrant from Transylvania, he's another character that was added just for the purposes of the cartoon, and seems to be still struggling to find his own way in Wolverton. Grandpa is played brilliantly by Stacy Keach Sr., and you can't help but feel secondhand embarrassment every time the old man chases a poor cat up a tree on all fours. Grandma Howard. Grandma, another new character that was added to the cartoon, is an immigrant from Transylvania, just like Grandpa. She's another werewolf that's completely incapable of reverting back to a human, and spends the entire show in her wolf form. However, Scott's pretty cool with his grandma, as the old lady is not half as embarrassing as his grandfather. As the show progresses, she becomes one of Scott's closest confidants and allies, especially when trying to contain Grandpa's feral behavior. On many occasions, Grandma is represented as a gypsy, with command over magic and clairvoyance, making her a witch in many ways. The gentle yet mysterious old gal is played by June Foray. Rupert Styles Stilinski. Styles is Scott's best friend and partner in crime. He's one of the few normal humans who's in on Scott's werewolf secret, and often teams up with Scott in his struggle to keep his family's identity a secret from the rest of Wolverton. Styles is one of the most supportive characters that Scott encounters in his school, but the pair isn't without their fair share of conflict. Styles is prone to feeling overlooked, as Scott is hell-bent on his quest to join the cool crowd. Styles also has a great desire to be a werewolf like his friend, and often feels that Scott doesn't appreciate his family's legacy enough. Styles is voiced by Don Most in the cartoon. Mayor Marconi. The poor mayor is definitely a conflicting character for most fans. He serves as the antagonist on many occasions, and he's quite prone to finding himself involved in schemes that are to the detriment of the town, and especially the Howard family. The character also exhibits somewhat racist behavior at many points in the show, but eventually comes to see reason due to our protagonist's efforts. Pamela Wells. Pamela is the most popular girl at Wolverton High. Like most popular high school girls from the 80s, she's also a bit snobbish in her demeanor towards Scott, who's head over heels in love with her. Pamela is also dating Mick McAllister, one of the meanest bullies at the high school, who picks on Scott as he is an outsider. Many of Scott's adventures involve him trying to keep the werewolf identity secret from Pam, which often ends up getting Ridge, the young werewolf, in even more trouble. Lisa Booth Marconi. Lisa is another human character who's aware of Scott's secret identity. Despite this, she has a massive crush on Scott, who often tends to overlook her. Like Lupe, she's also portrayed by Jean Ellis. The dynamic between Lisa and Scott is made even more interesting by the fact that she's the daughter of the annoying mayor. The timeless appeal of the Teen Wolf animated series. To be honest, Teen Wolf is one of the best properties to come out of the 80s trend of turning successful movies into cartoons. The plot can be corny and the jokes can feel old, but the show always has its heart in the right place. It deals with some of the most prevalent issues in life and manages to go a step beyond even that. Scott's struggles to fit in are a perfect metaphor for the immigrant experience, and manage to capture the ostracization and the discrimination firsthand. Now, representation is a term that has completely oversaturated popular media in the last decade, but Teen Wolf was actually one of the first shows to pull it off successfully. The fact that Scott's transformations look and feel like seizures is a quaint little nod to people who live with such afflictions every day, and was all the more necessary back in the 80s. Though the animation seems a bit outdated by today's standards, we'd be lying if we said that the nostalgia didn't cover up for it. The vibrant colors and simple line drawings more than make up for the lack of movement, and many of the jokes can actually leave you rolling on the floor. Due to the show's steadfast commitment to depicting the world around it, Teen Wolf the Animated Series is a timeless treat in all the best ways. Marvelous verdict. Teen Wolf is a show whose poignant storytelling and sensitive approach to real-world problems are rare, even in today's day and age. Despite this, the show never comes across as preachy or self-righteous, which has honestly been quite overdone in the media in 2024. Thus, if you're looking for a trip back to a simpler time and a show that evokes all the best emotions, Teen Wolf is the thing for you. That's it for today, but do let us know which underrated gem you would like us to cover next on this channel. Also, before you go, please don't forget to click on the subscribe button and stay updated with all of our marvelous content. So goodbye, and we'll see you in the next one. Meanwhile, don't be afraid to wolf out. Oh